Hi guys, my name is Steven, and on behalf of my sound guy Carl, I'd like to welcome you back to my calibration channel. In this video, I'm going to continue with an exciting and thought-provoking idea that I discussed in my first video. It's from Dan Collins. If you'll recall, I left the first video saying what the downsides were to Dan's idea in a very brief fashion. Let's get into more of the nitty-gritty. First of all, as I said, one downside to Dan's approach is you got to buy an extra probe. Now, if you're watching this at work, like in a pharma, the cost that you expended by watching the first video at work exceeds the cost of the probe. Let's call it 50 to 250 bucks and have done with it. The next cost is greater, and that's the cost of the extra calibration. Now, I've seen people who say this doubles the cost of the calibration. Let me tell you why I think that is not true. Let's suppose I'm preparing to do this calibration myself. First thing I got to do is locate the appropriate standard with which to perform the calibration. Is it in the calibration lab? I don't know. I've got to find it nonetheless. Once I find it, I have to protect it from other calibration technicians who need that standard today to go do their calibrations. Then I've got to drag it and all my other equipment out to the site where I'm going to perform this calibration. Lastly, I got to get access to the equipment. Production managers who control vessels like this want to stay in production. They do not want to give up their production time to non-value added activities such as calibration. So I'm going to have to contact these guys and negotiate the window to do my calibration. Now, compared to those costs, the cost of taking the data I need to calibrate this sensor while I put it in an oil bath along with a standard, relatively minor. And if I were to toss in Dan's probe at the same time and measure them both together and record Dan's calibration data in addition to the single sensor data that I need to collect already, let's be conservative and say it adds at most 5 or 10% to the total cost of all the activities I described. I don't think it's a very big deal. The next cost is a big deal. I think Dan's got a great idea, or else I wouldn't be taking up your time on YouTube. But it's in a magazine article. It has to be transposed into code that our PID controller can use to run the process. People change control code every day and create new control code every day. It's not impossible, but it's got to be done right. It's got to be done by somebody who knows what they're doing, and it's not going to be cheap, and there's no way to avoid it. Now, the last cost is the cost I think is going to be the highest cost, and the one that's got some political speed bumps in it. That's the cost of validation. I like Dan's idea, but that doesn't mean I get to go into work tomorrow, put a second probe in my vessel, tweak the software a little bit, and keep producing product that's going to turn into drugs that go in people's bodies. I have a personal and professional responsibility to validate this method as it's being used. The company I work for has a corporate responsibility to do the same thing. And under the Code of Federal Regulations, me and the company both have a responsibility to cooperate with the FDA to validate this method so we can be sure at the end that it's producing safe and effective drugs just like it did before. We don't want to avoid that cost, and we shouldn't. But I should say that people validate changes in pharma processes all the time. So there's people who are good at it. It's going to be expensive, however, and it's unavoidable. Now, there's another downside to Dan's idea that's not immediately apparent if you just look at the block diagram. Dan is solving a problem that the pharma industry doesn't even know they've got. The best way I can demonstrate that to you is to talk about return on investment. The return on investment in the pharma sector is around 20%. That's spectacular. Now, given that return that they're getting already, I think they're very likely to listen to Dan's idea and say, look, we're making 20% already. Why should we take the risk of investing in your method, spend all that money, when we're doing really great already? We're not going to rock the boat. Now, I'm hearing my guy Carl ask me a question. Shouldn't farmers be vitally interested in process optimization and increasing their efficiencies? Well, let's discuss that in a thought experiment while we look at the block diagram for our current single sensor process. We're doing great. We're running a process that chunks out 10,000 liter batches as fast as it can go. Everybody around it is trained in how it works. It's been running for years. It's making us a lot of money. Now, across the street from our facility, we see some new construction. Pretty soon a sign goes up that says, "Future home of Joe's Pharmaceuticals. We've got competition." Now the first thing that Joe does is back a truck up into his facility and dump off a 10,000 liter vessel. Before you know it, Joe's running the same process in his vessel that we're running right here. Now, were that ever to occur, you could be damn sure that either Joe's going to start using Dan's methods, or we both are, because we have a responsibility to protect our cash flow, protect the niche for our product, and if we can, try and force Joe back out of business. We might even bring in Dan as a consultant while we do it. In the absence of that competition, we can see that the pharma sector is perfectly free to pass on the cost of their inefficiencies right straight to their customers. Let's talk about their customers. Their customers can't benefit from competition to produce the product they need. Also, they need it really bad. They're very, very sick. They're willing to pay any price that the pharma set for this product. In addition, both the FDA and the pharma sector are very, very risk averse. This can be good, sometimes it's bad. It was good in the case of thalidomide. If you're familiar with the story, thalidomide was first produced and dispensed to pregnant women in Europe. And at some point in the past, the manufacturers came to the FDA and said, "Hey, we want a license to produce and dispense this drug in the United States." If it weren't for the fact there was one woman in the FDA who said, "You know what, we're not having this," they would have done it. And the horrible results would have been even worse because they would have been duplicated in the United States. In addition, Dan's approach features a preventative aspect that just doesn't match the pharma business model. The pharma business model consists of identifying a disease and then trying to create a marketable solution that gets rid of those symptoms. The pharma sector has never been able to monetize disease prevention, but if they ever are capable of it, you can be sure they're going to do it. Ironically, in the last decade, the FDA rolled out a guidance or initiative called PAT. It stood for Process Analysis Technology. I say it's ironic because in that initiative, they said, "Hey, pharma industry, you're not very efficient. Other business sectors have solved problems that you haven't solved yet. Get on the ball." As a matter of fact, they recommend the same kind of solutions that Dan was proposing in his magazine article 10 years ago. Well, what happened to Pat? It disappeared. The reason for that is the subject of perhaps another video. Suffice it to say, in the absence of the pressure that might have been produced by Pat, there's not much optimization going on in the pharma sector. Okay, let's get to the upsides of Dan's approach. It's responsive and predictive. That just means that instead of waiting around for retrospective data produced by calibrations, we've got an online real-time process that's going to eliminate the failures that I talked about before they ever occur. In addition, Dan's method produces a massive data set that has added value. For example, you could use it to optimize your process if you ever chose to. Now, when Dan wrote his article, no one had uttered the words big data yet, but they certainly have since. Now, some of what I read about big data I think is nonsense. Some of it is very exciting and could be critical to the survival of the pharma sector as we know it. Okay, so I've brought us to the future by talking about big data. If you're a viewer who's stuck with me for these two videos, I've got a problem that I hope you can help me with. I want to take Dan's idea out of the magazine and put it into a real-time modeling platform where I could do what Dan did, which is tweak the inputs and watch the process outcome in real time. If you know of a platform that I could use to do that, I would greatly appreciate hearing from you. In any case, I hope you enjoyed these videos, and I hope you'll stick around for more that I intend to produce about topics that would be of interest to other calibrators. So on behalf of my sound guy Carl and myself, I want to thank you very much for the time you spent watching these videos.